Okay, picture this. The smell of toasted pecans, a bubbling, creamy sauce, and savory roasted chicken just completely taking over your kitchen. Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm so glad you're hanging out with us because we're about to walk through a total culinary glow-up of a comfort food classic. You know, the kind of food that feels like a warm hug but actually has a gourmet touch. Let's dive right into making the ultimate shaker hot chicken salad.
So you might be wondering, how exactly do you elevate a retro casserole? Look, we all know the old school versions can be, well, a little bland, right? Usually they lean way too hard on canned soups and processed shortcuts. But today, we're tossing those out. We're going to look at how a few specific, scratch-made tweaks can totally transform a nostalgic dish into something vibrant, creamy, and modern, all without losing an ounce of that classic comfort.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for this explainer. First, we'll talk about upgrading a retro classic. Then we'll build our homemade sauce, mix the casserole, and finally, bake it for that perfect crunch.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, an upgraded retro classic.
Instead of reaching for the can opener, we're relying on 3 really thoughtful upgrades here. First up, a quick homemade sauce. This literally changes the entire texture of the dish. Second, we're throwing in some Dijon mustard for a bright, sharp tanginess. And third, dried tarragon. This herb is a total game changer, adding the sophisticated, aromatic vibe. When you put them all together, you get a uniquely creamy, tangy flavor profile that completely sets this chicken salad apart.
But wait, before we even touch a pan or chop a single veggie, let's prep the kitchen. Go ahead and adjust your oven rack to the middle position and get that oven preheating to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 175 degrees Celsius for our metric friends. While that's warming up, lightly grease a 2-quart baking dish. Honestly, a standard 8x8 pan works absolutely perfectly for this.
Moving on to Section 2, let's get into the fun part, building the homemade sauce.
Grab a small saucepan, pop it on medium heat, and melt down exactly 2 tablespoons or 28 grams of unsalted butter. You want to hear that nice, gentle sizzle. Once it's beautifully melted, grab your whisk and vigorously stir in 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Then you're going to gradually whisk in your liquids. We're talking a half cup of chicken stock, homemade or low-sodium store-bought is totally fine, along with a half cup of whole milk. Now just bring all of that to a really gentle simmer.
Now, cooking this flour is absolutely crucial. It builds a rich foundation before the liquids even hit the pan. You want to keep stirring that butter and flour mixture over medium heat for, say, 2 to 3 minutes. What you're looking for is a visual shift. It should turn a nice light brown, and more importantly, you want to smell this incredibly toasty, nutty aroma. Doing this cooks out that weird raw flour taste and gives your sauce some serious depth.
Okay, once your stock and milk are whisked into that nutty base, go ahead and drop the heat to low. The goal here is just to gently simmer the mix while stirring constantly for about 4 to 6 minutes. You're waiting for it to hit this beautiful gravy-like texture. It shouldn't be a thick paste, and it definitely shouldn't be a thin broth. It needs to thickly coat the back of a spoon. Think of a really perfect holiday gravy.
All right, on to Section 3, mixing the casserole.
Time to grab a big bowl because we're building our flavor base. Get ready to vigorously whisk together a half cup of softened cream cheese, a tablespoon of that tangy Dijon we talked about, a half teaspoon of onion powder, a half teaspoon of our fancy dried tarragon, and a half teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. Now, pay super close attention to the salt here. You need exactly 1 teaspoon of Diamond Crystal kosher salt. If you've only got standard table salt, make sure you cut that in half by volume, otherwise you're going to end up with a total salt bomb. Once you've whisked all those bold ingredients into a smooth paste, just whisk in that warm chicken sauce we just finished on the stove.
Next up, we fold in the really hearty stuff. Toss in 2 cups, about 300 grams of diced chicken. Honestly, it can be poached, roasted, or even just a store-bought rotisserie chicken if you want to save some time. Follow that up with 2 stalks of fresh diced celery, which gives you about 2/3 of a cup, and a half cup of toasted chopped pecans. Get in there and firmly fold and stir everything to evenly combine. You want to make sure every single piece of chicken and celery is totally coated in that gorgeous sauce.
You know what's really fascinating about this mix? It's the immediate contrast in textures. On one hand, you have this incredibly rich, velvety sauce coating the tender chicken. But then, bam! It's paired with the fresh snap of the celery and the deep, rich crunch of those toasted pecans. It completely avoids that mushy trap that so many retro casseroles fall into, making every single bite super dynamic.
And finally, Section 4, baking the perfect crunch.
So we take our perfectly mixed, texture-rich chicken salad, transfer it into that greased 2-quart baking dish we prepped earlier, and smooth it out into an even layer.
And now for the ultimate retro callback. I know it's hard, but resist the urge to snack on these. You're going to cap the entire casserole with exactly 1.5 cups or 65 grams of crushed ruffled potato chips. Spreading them evenly across the top guarantees this unbeatable, savory, salty crunch that contrasts so beautifully with the creamy inside. And yeah, the ruffled texture is actually key here, because they hold up perfectly while baking, without turning to mush.
Let's quickly map out the final stretch so you know exactly what to expect. At 0 minutes, your prep is done and the dish goes into that 350-degree oven. You're going to bake it for about 30 minutes. But don't just watch the clock. Use your eyes. You're waiting for the edges to bubble furiously and that potato chip topping to turn a gorgeous, toasted golden brown. Then, at the 40-minute mark, your resting phase is over and it is finally ready to serve.
Now, I really need to highlight this point at the very end, that 10-minute gap. You literally must give the dish a full 10 minutes to cool before you serve it. I know taking it straight from the oven to the plate is super tempting, but that resting time is absolutely crucial. It allows that creamy, gravy-like sauce to perfectly set up. If you skip this, your casserole won't hold its shape and it'll just turn into a soupy mess on your plate. And nobody wants that.
As you imagine pulling that bubbling golden-crusted dish out of the oven, just imagine smelling the toasted pecans, the tarragon, and those savory potato chips. I want to leave you with this thought. We just took a simple, nostalgic comfort food and elevated it completely through scratch-made sauces and thoughtful texture additions. So what retro classic will you upgrade for your modern dinner table next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and happy cooking.